Welcome everyone to ETH Zurich. It's great to see you here. Great that you are all coming and that you joined this event tonight. And I'm sure that you are looking forward, as I am, to this fireside chat with Janina Kugel, moderated by Petra Ehmann. These two very distinguished women, both impactful leaders and drivers of change and innovation and progress within their own fields, will be talking about disruption, diversification, and digitalization in the workplace. These topics have become very popular, and rightly so, in a working world that must change rapidly and dramatically to meet the demands of our working world in a very complex environment, rife with challenges and crises, but also abundant with opportunities to make fundamental and game-changing progress. I am proud to welcome you here to ETH Zurich tonight, a university for science and technology that dates back to the year 1855, when the founders of modern-day Switzerland created it as a center of innovation and technology. Today, ETH Zurich is forging connections all around the world and is pioneering effective solutions to the many global challenges of today and of tomorrow. Growing rapidly, we now have over 24,000 students at ETH Zurich, over 10,000 members of personnel, and over 550 professors. According to the QS ranking, our university is the 9th best in the world. As the Vice President of Personal Development and Leadership of ETH Zurich, I can say that the topics that will be discussed tonight are directly relevant also to us as a university, and are being avidly discussed within many of our departments and offices. Our vision at ETH Zurich is to pave the way in a complex world. Achieving this vision will require us to nourish a working culture and environment where all members of our community can flourish and develop themselves, and where everyone can bring their individual talents and strengths at the table to lead the change. It will require us to take actions and follow through on important initiatives and projects that have already started. For example, we are currently working on a Future of Work project to increase flexibility and support individual lifestyles and commitments and preferences so that people can have their freedom and determine their own routines. We are also at the beginning of building a lifelong learning hub with the purpose of developing social and leadership competencies at ETH. Competencies that will enable us to focus on those aspects of our community and leadership that will ensure that we remain competitive in a world where talented people seek even more autonomy and meaning and connectedness in the workplace. At ETH Zurich, we have an already diverse community, something I say with tremendous pride. Yet still, there is work to be done on increasing diversity and designing the system in such a way that the diverse people we welcome to us also experience a sense of belonging and are directly enabled to contribute their unique talents, perspective, and insights. I personally see this as one of the greatest opportunities of our times to have an impact and create a ripple effect. At universities around the world, there are not enough women in leadership positions. Not enough women hold professorships. We just talked about it. At ETH, we have a strategy in place to ensure that this will change. The executive board at ETH sees this as our opportunity to increase intellectual creativity and excellence, our opportunity to pave the way and send the message out to women and girls that there are no limits to what they can achieve. I will soon give the word to Petra Ehmann, ETH Zurich and Stanford alumna and member of the ETH Circle. The ETH Circle is an international network of the foremost global ETH Zurich ambassadors that actively support ETH Zurich in enhancing its international reputation and in maintaining a global network. Petra combines at least 3 skills that make her a truly remarkable person. She is a digital leader. She's a global citizen and an ambassador for women in tech. Petra has followed a steep and successful career path from an internet startup in Brazil to the tech giant Google to the international media company Ringier, where she now works as Chief Innovation Officer, responsible to bring innovations to 130 group companies in 19 countries. Besides this, she also serves as a member of the board of directors at the publicly listed Bossard Group, an international manufacturing company with Swiss headquarters. Diversity is her passion. She loves it and she works on it. And she lives it in multiple ways. Having lived and worked in 4 continents, speaking 4 world languages fluently, and using her voice as an advisory board member to WeShape Tech, I think you will present this later, for greater diversity in the technology industry. So thank you, Petra, and thank you, Janina, for being here today, for sharing your experience, knowledge, and visions to the future. The stage is yours, Petra. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. We are very excited to be here. Thank you so much for the introduction, but especially a very warm thank you that we may host this wonderful event with our star guest tonight here at ETH Zurich. From WeShape Tech, we would like to guide you through this event in collaboration with ETH, and WeShape Tech is a network for greater diversity in technology. We are inspired by eventually achieving 50-50 in tech. This is what all our efforts go into, all our hearts go into that, step by step, women by women. And despite the numbers don't look really good, we know that. If you look at head of states, it's just 8% women. If you look at CEOs, it's just 10% women. If we go back to the tech world, if you mix business and tech, then we get to the low 2-digit numbers. But despite that, we have hope. And we have hope because there is proven ways how we can increase diversity. We are very grateful that we have Harvard professor Iris Bonet as our advisory board member, and she told us big times that role models are so important. And that is why we're also very excited to have you, Janina, here as our role model for tonight. But for you to know who are the faces behind WeShape Tech, it is actually Janine, founder from Graphic to Angela, head of marketing at Botimo. It is Geraldine, okay, working at AWS, and Melanie Gabriel, I'm not sure she made it already, co-founder of Yokoi and chief marketing officer. She will show up in a second, I think. If you're interested in joining the board, please remember those faces and approach them during the apéro. For tonight, we have our wonderful guest here, Janina. She actually does not need any introduction, but her resume and her achievements are so remarkable that we wish to highlight a few of those. So she's a very charismatic leader, a leader who leads with great courage and passion. And the first time I actually heard about her was a while back ago, because I've been following you already since a long time. It was when she was chief HR officer at Siemens. And the remarkable fact about this is she became chief HR officer of Siemens and joined the highest level of this gigantic company as the youngest executive. Led tremendous change. I heard from lots of colleagues also here from Zug about all the various efforts. Nowadays, she is in the board of directors of 3 publicly listed companies. One of them you might have heard, which is TUI, a travel and tourism company. Another one is IBM spin-out, Kyndryl, New York-based and also publicly listed IT infrastructure services company. The last one is Concranes. But that is not enough. There are 2 advisory board members to bring in change into society, BCG and the IQT Group. IQT Group is a purpose-driven investment company. I hope I got that one right. But then beyond the business, there is also the greater purpose that interests Janina and is dear to her heart. So she recently joined the AIDS Foundation as a member of the board of trustees. Janina, we are very, very pleased to have you here. You said that it is time to disrupt, it is time to change, to diversify, and to digitize. With that, we're very honored to having you here. Please welcome on stage. So Janina, we have been knowing the public Janina, that we see all the achievements, all the different companies, but we're obviously very curious and also who is that person, Janina? Can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and what shaped you during your upbringing that was later very relevant for the top manager, Janina?
Yeah, I can. I mean, maybe the most funny thing is like when I was checking in the hotel, the concierge said to me, did you come all the way from Stuttgart? And I looked at him and said, huh? What? You know, kind of like, what are you referring to? And then I remembered he had my passport, so this is where I was brought up. I'm born and lived in Stuttgart for the first many years of my life. And then went on to study as well in Germany. And here maybe comes like one of the things that my parents said to me is like, you can do whatever you want to do. We're going to finance you for a max of 6 years, right? Remember, that was a time when there was no bachelor and master, so it was pretty much like the diploma for those of you that actually speak German. They said it's like you can change your subject once, okay? So you can try 2 things out, and you need to go into a country where you don't speak the language yet. And that was, I mean, on the one hand side, you know, they gave me a lot of freedom, but they also gave me very clear barriers. And I did it all, right? So I changed once, you know, I started with psychology, and then I thought, oh, these are also social here, right? You know, then I went on to economics, and I went to study in Italy because that was a language that was dear to me, and I didn't speak it then. And so I think that is what I would actually say, and as my parents are not here, they were pushing me. They were also, you know, giving me pretty clear boundaries. But they also always told me everything was possible. But they also very clearly said is, you're a woman, you're black, it's like twice as hard as if you were a white man, so always remember that. And the point is, it sounds so cruel, but I think later on I figured that out. But you know, when someone always tells you you can do whatever, then you also believe you can do whatever.
So that means your parents opened the sky to you, and you then worked very hard.
I will never tell that to them, right? But they're not on social media, so I can say it here.
Thank you. So you moved up the ladder pretty quickly to senior management. What do you think were important steps on your way there, or were jumps that you did that you would recommend others, that you say those were crucial moments, and it was really good for me to lean in, to ask for it, to whatnot it was?
I mean, I often get that question is like, can you plan a career? I don't think you can plan a career, but what you can plan is to build the basis, which is at least necessary in large international organizations to actually make it. So it's sort of like having understood that you need to work operationally, as well as in headquarters, out there in the regions. If a company like Siemens has several divisions, you should also get the idea of several things, and that's the basis that you can create. Of course, there's always exceptions, but mostly if you haven't done that, right, then you're not going to get anywhere. And then what I did very often is I took the opportunities when they came, and they did not always come when I wanted them. You know, so it was also, sometimes you were just, you know, we lived abroad, and, you know, I thought, okay, we had settled. I had just done a major restructuring, you know, which you usually do when you're on HR, and, you know, felt happy there. Kids were integrated and whatever, and there came another offer, better role and all of it. And so eventually, you know, I was interviewing, I got the job offer, and then I thought, okay, we tell the kids only then. And they were 6, I think, 5 or 6 by the time. And I said, well, we go back to Germany because I have another job. And then my daughter said, well, if you go, I don't. Right? And she called her friend and said, can I live with you? Because mom is going somewhere else and I really don't want to go. So it was like, you know, it was kind of like, you know, how can you convince it? But when I say it's of course, it's a fun part, but taking career decisions very often means it's not always pleasant, not for yourself, And definitely it's also always a compromise from the family perspective. So and sometimes I was making the compromise, and sometimes the family was making the compromises. And I think that is also very important.
The compromise part. And you
The
had,
compromise part, yeah.
You had the family and the career. So is the compromise the key? So can you have it all?
You can, but not always every day. So it's very simple. If you work 60, 70 plus hours a week, if you have children and you want to see them also, you know, I mean, not like see them when they're like nicely asleep, you know, you say, oh, haha, my children, they look so nice. You know, if you want to spend some time with them, then obviously the day only has a certain amount of time. So I gave up on a lot of things. I haven't seen movies unless I was sitting in a plane. I always liked to do a lot of sports. The only thing that I kept on doing was running, because you can pretty much like run everywhere in the world and you don't need a lot of things. So, you know, something where I would always have to have a partner or playing tennis or anything like that was all a total no-go, yeah, unless maybe I was on vacation. Now, do I regret it? No, because it was a conscious choice. I mean, no one forced me to trying to be ambitious. No one forced me to agree to certain jobs. No one forced me to have a family or to have children. That's what I wanted. And now they're teenagers and I have more time. The discussions are slightly more difficult, you know. But I think it is possible. But it's also possible, and you said that when you speak about like the flexibility of time. I have been working as people have now realized you can work for the last 16 years. Because technically, it's possible to dial in, to have video conferencing, maybe not so fancy like we have it today. But I mean, and when I was pregnant, and then I have twins, right? And I was running a department, and I had a very, what you would consider conservative boss back then. And I told him at some point, well, actually I'm pregnant. And he said, okay. And then I said, by that time I was in Germany, and then, you know, Germany is a little bit like Switzerland. Very often women stop working when they get the children and whatever. And I said, well, but I'm coming back after maternity leave, and I will continue to work. And he said, okay. And then I said, but I need a little bit more flexibility. And he said, okay. And then he looked at me, and I looked at him, and he said, I'm sure you're going to make it. And that was it. And it sounds so small, but with the fact that he said, I know you, and you're gonna manage it, and you're gonna make it, and sometimes you will be there, but I also know I don't even have to discuss it with you. If something is urgent, you will be there. And of course I was. But with that little sentence, he was making it very clear to everyone. So I also had someone that by his personal lifestyle, you would never have been thinking that he would have been so easy. So then my boss and my boss, you know, they were all kind of like, oh, she will never come back, and what do we do, and let's see if her... And that was also a moment when I said, is like, you're legally not allowed to look for a successor of mine as long as I return after maternity leave. And my boss looked at me and he said like, yeah, but I mean, will you? And I said, yeah, I will. And that was, you know, he looked at me and he gave me more, and I said, it's like, only because your wife chose to do what she does, that does not mean that every other woman that you meet in your office space needs to do it. So what I'm trying to say is it's not always easy. It's also sometimes tough, because you also have to be brutal. I mean, kind of, you can imagine it's not super funny to say your boss, hey, it's legally not allowed. Yeah. Did he like me? No. But the point is, I think, is like once you have reached the management level, the first thing that you need to learn is that it cannot be liked by everyone. Yeah.
That's actually a question that I have way later. Whether you let's jump. Do you have to be at the beginning of my career? I always thought you got to be respected. Better be respected, not liked. Right now, I'm at the point where I'm questioning that to certain degrees. So what's your take on that?
I think when you act that people can respect you, some of them will also like you. And by the way, I mean, now think about your own professional life. There is, only because you like a person, that does not mean that you like every decision that the person takes, that you like every day whatever they say and whatever they do, but it's an overall, you would say, is like, I respect the person, I think the person is fair, I think the person does the right thing, and I think that is what matters. If you, for example, take tough decisions, and I was in HR after the first 5, 6, 7 years of my career, and was doing a lot of restructuring. If you tell people that you're closing sites, if you tell people that you need to fire them, I mean, how could you ever imagine to be liked? So I think it's also very clear there's a job, and as long as you do it respectfully, you also will be respected. And I honestly have never experienced that someone was not following that path. And the point is, like, you know, I mean, I did not say that they need to go out to have a beer with me or a glass of wine afterwards, right? I mean, that's, by the way, at some point I didn't really have the time anyway to do it. But what I want to say is, like, I think when you look at it from a professional part, I would always, like, say, be respected. Because if you start to being liked, you make too many compromises that are not helpful for the business. It sounds so cruel, but you can still be nice, but, right, there's a limit.
Yeah. In your book, It's Now, you write also about advanced leadership, like the new type of leadership or leadership XXL. To the ones who are not familiar with this concept, what do you mean by that, and what is it that we could learn from that?
So for me, you know, when we speak about leadership, very often people speak about what I would consider managers, like team leaders. They run a department, they run a manufacturing plant, and they make sure that things are running smoothly. But then leadership comes, and that is more also about everything needs to be managed, but you also need to have a vision. You need to tell people, where are you going and why are you going there? Because very often the vision is not yet there. So it's a perspective that you are showing, but you also need to explain why you believe that's the right way to go. And advanced leadership is, for me, and it sounds easy, but I think it's a rare species. It's people that create something better, not only for themselves or for their own organization, but beyond. So people that trigger something, people that create something where they say, and most of the time that I met these people in person, they were actually not so interested about making something for themselves, but by doing something for someone else, for their organization, maybe even for the country, for I don't know, for society, you know, they reached much more and pretty much like also got those satisfaction. Now there's plenty of them, right? But I'm just, you know, if you're wondering what she's talking about, Greta Thunberg, whether you like her or not, what she did with starting what she was starting a few years ago was creating an attention on the issue that scientists have been saying and preaching for years to a level that she at least got a publicity to that with many others that actually joined her in doing that, that I would say it's like it's not only about herself, it's much more about what comes next for the entire world. And so, I mean, there is, of course, you can see that in every, you know, it does not have to be like a global hero always, but I think if you believe in that, I think these are the people that are warming my heart.
Let's stay with the topic of leadership. We are living in a way more polarized society where when you speak up, you can get hyped, the next day you can get bashed. In a polarized society, it's also more important to actually speak up for the right causes and have a voice. Make clear what your stance is with regards to diversity, racism, etc. But it's tougher. So I think you also once wrote, leaders lack courage and would need to have more of that. What is the threshold that leaders should have for sure with regards to courage?
When I have to say another, I have to share one thought before I'm answering rightly to your question, because when you introduced me and said it's like she was courageous, I have to tell you, over the last 12 months I've been thinking, yeah, I guess I was courageous in many ways, but then when I'm looking at the people in Afghanistan or when I'm currently looking at the people in Iran, then I'm thinking, oh no, courage is something totally different, yeah? So I just want to also put that into perspective, that when we are thinking, oh my God, do I dare to say it? Do I dare to speak up? You know, most of the companies always like say, speak up, you know, tell me the truth. And then we also know that there's a lot of managers that once you do that, it's not what they want to hear. And maybe they are kind of like, you're not getting the pay rise or you're not getting the promotion, all of it. Hell, but what is it that you're really risking compared to others that are really fighting for more? And that is why I think sometimes it's worth it when we are afraid And I think it's a very human feeling. If you try something new, if you break into very new grounds that no one has ever done, especially you have never done, of course it's scary. And of course it's something where you know that you also maybe will get not always a lot of applause, but also a lot of resistance. But on the other hand, what is it that you risk? Because if you do things wrong, you just can't undo them. There's only one thing that I think you cannot undo, and I think personally it's a very good thing, is like once you become a parent, right? So children are born, and this is it, right? But everything else, whether you did something wrong in your job, whether you did like a bad contract, whether you chose the wrong company, whether you chose the wrong partner, whatever, there's everything that you can undo with a lot of effort and sometimes also a lot of pain. But I think that is always something that we have to put into perspectives. Nothing has ever changed in this world without having had people that were courageous to try it out. And when you do it in a way, and here I'm coming back to that visionary part of leadership, if you want to try something new, there's a lot of people that think it's like, I have an idea, let's go for it. And then they're kind of like surprised that no one is supporting them. So creating that idea is also like sharing your idea, getting different perspectives in. That's also an aspect of diversity, kind of like, adjusting it, and then breaking into the organization, which usually means you already have supporters from day 2.
I think it's also what you mentioned. It's like this person who starts to dance, right?
Yeah.
On the hill.
Yes. I don't know, do you know that video, that YouTube followers? Okay, so if you haven't done it, like, watch it. It's like 2 minutes, like dancing, leadership by dancing on a hill. I think it's a very nice picture. Is you see only like a crowd of people, most probably it's an open concert or something like that, and then someone is getting up, and there's no sound to that video, right? And someone's standing up and starting to dance, and you can see like everyone else is like thinking, oh, who's that weirdo? And then it takes a while, and then the second person is just starting to dance as well, and then another while, but not as long anymore, until the third, and then suddenly it becomes a movement, right? So first, this person was the weirdo, and then suddenly you are the weirdo if you're not getting up. And so if you're not courageous enough to be the first one, and many are not, and that's okay. And if you're not courageous enough to be number 2, then at least be courageous enough to be number 3, to be number 4, or number 10, because everyone that wants to drive change needs those people that are supporting him or her to actually make it happen. And I think that is such a, I never found another better symbol than the dancing guy.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and it's very visual. So I think what you're basically saying is, as a leader, you got to have the courage to be at least the weirdo once.
Yeah, or twice.
Or twice. Yeah. We touched base on a little bit on leadership and vulnerability with the respect topic. So nowadays, we are more in an equal place, and we got to be more vulnerable and approachable and humble. So where do you draw the line between admitting weaknesses and showing strength? Where do you draw the line between telling people what to do and allowing them free space to do what they think is right?
I would always say that being humble is worthwhile everywhere and every time. Now, there is moments, and there have been a lot of moments, where I would never have been showing my weakness, or I would never have been showing that I don't know, because I knew if I do, they're going to kill me, right? There is sometimes situations when you're in a confrontation, or when you exactly know, and those of you maybe that are in management levels, it's not always about the matter, the subject that you're actually working on. Is much more about the politics, who's supporting you, who actually is only looking forward that you're getting like a lot of shit in your face, sorry for my language, right? But that, these people. And so these are the moments where opening up can be a risk. Now, in your own team, I think the strongest as a leader is understanding that you're good in some things, and you better look for a team that is completing you. The mini-me's are always very, they're like you, they think like you, they discuss like you, and blah, blah, blah. That is easy, but finding people that are completing you also means that there is more discussion. But that only works if you can admit that you don't know, you can admit that you're afraid, you can admit that you are having your weak moment, because then others are going to be in there for you. And I believe that these teams, and I've experienced that these teams exist, but they only exist if everyone works that way, and they do not exist if you speak about it, that this is what is important, but then you don't walk the talk. And they actually, I think, exist to many, many high levels. And sometimes you can also create them, beyond your own team with others. I mean, and I'm hopeful that you all have a person in your professional environment, or better, more than only one, that you can trust anytime. It's like friends that you can tell anything, and you know that they're not going to tell your story around, And so I think having these people in your professional environment, and that also, by the way, is like my thinking of networks. Networks are not, they can also be, but it's not like those visible networks. Networks are also people that are reliable, that you can trust them. They manage things for you as well as you manage things for them. And I think they are a lot. There's a lot of value to that.
And if we look at organizations that when they start changing a little, so there might be the structures where you have your own team and the outside world. In many ways, we have more and more complex teams or cross-functional teams where you work together with others, or where others join your projects, but they don't report to you. Like, what's your approach with this?
Figuring out who they are, what they can contribute, what they want to contribute. And I think also making it very clear, if you have such a diversity in your team, and especially also with some that are always there and some that only partly join, there also need to be certain rules. But with certain rules, I'm not saying that there needs to be someone who's commanding, but there must be an agreement of, for example, what can happen. So some of the discussions that are currently happening is like, after COVID and people working virtually a lot, can that still work? And how actually can you gather people together? I always say, of course you can. But there needs to be those moments when everyone has to be in one room because speaking about innovations or speaking about certain things are easier when people also see each other. But you also need to trust. And if you cannot trust, you need to act upon it. So being a manager also means who is the person, what do they need, and being able to adapt to the different needs. So if you have a team of 5, I'm sure that they have 5 times different expectations to you as a manager. And some need more guidance and the other hate guidance. Some want feedback every day, and some don't need feedback every day. And that is, I think, the biggest challenge for managers, to adapt, not to expect that their employees adapt to them, but to understand that you can only get the best out of your team if you adapt to them. And by the way, it is always, of course, surroundings. So a former employee of mine, before he delivered something somewhere, he was always showing it to me. And at some point I said to him, hell, this is such a tiny little thing. It's your responsibility, right? And we're speaking here about a super senior manager, okay? And I said, why do you always confirm it? Why do you always have to show it to me? I trust you. You have always done an excellent work. And then he looked at me and said, just want to be sure. And then we agreed. I said, okay, let's do it like this. These tiny little things, don't show them to me because it's annoying me. I don't need to see that. I don't really have the time. And, I know you're anyway the better expert, right? And if for the first time you deliver something and I am not happy with that, and I only get to know afterwards, then we agree that you remind me of this day when I told you that you don't have to show everything to me. Did that ever happen? Never. Right? But there were others, equally senior, where a week before my deadline was approaching, I was making sure that I had the documents because I knew I would never get it when it was agreed to be delivered, right? So that was me also understanding that I had to change that. Was that easy? No. Did that annoy me sometimes? Yes. Did I annoy my team? Yes. So I think that is also something that you always have to take into consideration.
You touch upon so many topics, I could jump all across my script.
So you're wondering why you ever prepared, right?
Yeah. No. Let's pick work from home. You touched upon that before, that when you were in Italy, it was a rather conservative setting. Now with COVID-19, some of us really hope that the workplace changed for a more progressive workplace and hope that this will stay. Nevertheless, there are a bunch of tech companies who decide that everybody needs to be back at least 3 days per week, and the days are already fixed. Stanford professor Nicholas Bloom, who researches remote work, said this was Apple in one case. Apple has fallen behind the time. So, as a former chief HR officer, what's your take with work from home? Is that a trend that just came up and will go away, or is that to stay?
No, I think it will be there to stay. And by the way, working from home is getting the flexibility. Those that want to come to the office every day, they still can. Right? There are some people that say, like, I want to have a difference. Home is home and maybe office is office. Speaking about those that actually can choose. I have always been a big believer. And again, here, I've been saying I've been working myself more than 15 years like that. My former company, Siemens, had agreements like more than 10 years already that this was actually possible. And by the way, I believe that certain groups of people, if they do not get that flexibility also going on, they will leave. And rightly so. I mean, think about it. There was like 1 year or 2 years that, depending on the country, there was a total lockdown. People worked, they delivered, there hasn't been any company that actually said they had a performance issue. So there was a lot of trust that was given to them and they delivered. And then afterwards you tell them, I want you back in the office because my managers are not capable of telling the team when they actually have to come in. I think it should rather be an issue. And do I believe that people need to come together? Yes. But I also believe that a normal social behavior is that you also want to meet your colleagues once in a while, right? I mean, did you enjoy it, like being locked in your apartment 7 days a week? Was that funny? It wasn't funny. So we also yearn to have some interaction with people. But what it means as a manager, that it's not that you remember something and you get out of your office or whatever, the office space, and walk over to someone and say, hey, so-and-so, hey, Petra, now that I see you, there is something that I need to discuss with you. No, then you actually have to, it's a more of an effort. I can feel it now. So for example, when you're always sitting in an office together, there's so many things that you actually share with each other while you're having a coffee. But organizing just like a coffee chat virtually is what very few people do. But if you do it, you can still have that connection.
Mm. Yeah, I also believe that the office space will change in the way that it will become rather like an off-site space, or a space where you can actually meet and discuss. Yeah. But coming just to the office to sit there with your headphones and not get disturbed by the phone call next.
Exactly. So it depends also what you're doing, right?
Yeah, totally. We're talking a little bit about organizations at the moment. So there's an author that I admire a lot, Frederic Laloux, who actually has written about organizations that they evolve from time, from being elderly-led to being very top-down, command and control, to rather being organizations where culture prevails over strategy. And he says the next evolution is that we live and work in organizations that are self-managed. I know from Bossard, where I'm on the board, that we push the company into that direction to empower employees more and more. Now, I'd be curious to hear your opinion about self-managed. Is that the future of organizations?
I think you need to have a very high evolution grade in your company or in your organization to have that. And that also needs to be the willingness of people to be like that, because self-managing is more difficult than getting told what you need to do. You told me, boss, that I should do it. Wasn't good enough. I mean, it's not my problem, it's yours. You told me to do it. So, you know what I mean? Mm. And then, by the way, who takes the tough decisions? There was also a concept a few years ago that people would select their team lead, right? Like with a democratic vote. I mean, that works as long as the person doesn't have to take tough decisions. I mean, we can see that with the politicians, right? I mean, so, there is an election coming up in Germany where I currently live, in one of the regions, in one of the states. And you can actually see like certain statements that are pretty much like only done to get more votes from the one or the other side. Sometimes I'm wondering if he or she really believes what she's saying, then it's even a bigger catastrophe than only getting votes with that. So I would say it's a super high maturity grade. Now, I don't know who you are, right? But somehow you seem to have a connection to ETH, and somehow you need to be on LinkedIn, right? So because otherwise you wouldn't know about this event. But 80% of the people in the world work in jobs, in manufacturing, in service, where it is not about only the self-fulfillment. It is about making things work. It is about having a safe environment, having a production line that is running. If you think about fixing, for example, electricity, it's not self-management. It needs to be safe at the very first hand. It needs to be done. So I would say is how to get there can be discussed in a different way. Empower people, that is definitely something that I'm a strong believer in there. I have to admit that I don't believe that large organizations throughout all of their departments can be managed like that. But call me an old lady, and I will be very happy to see that this is proven in a different way. And if it's maybe in a smaller company of 100 people, I can imagine that. Could I imagine several 100,000 people managed like this? No.
So maybe we can prove you with Bossard.
Okay, don't tell him.
I will.
The funny thing is that the CEO of Bossard and I, we were together in our first years. We were colleagues in our first years at Accenture. So when Petra was like trying to tell me where she was on the board, she said, "This is a company that you don't know." And I said, "Yeah, I do." So that was like, that thing is like, like we are connected with everyone in the world through 10 other people or 6 other people, whatever, 7, yeah. I actually believe in that because sometimes I think it's funny.
Yeah, it's funny. It's a mystery and it always happens.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears a little, but still stick with organizations and the workplace. We've been working 5 work days since a long time. If we go back to 1825, I looked it up, so people worked 82 hours, 1900, 60 hours and 6 days. And then 1918, it became only 48 hours. And in 1956, since then we have 5 days of work per week. Isn't it time for disruption?
In Central Europe.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I think that is always what you always have to. This is a huge world, right? And that belief that I think the Western world had, like Central Western Europe and North America, that we are the only ones that are capable of doing certain things, and that the competition only lies in that tiny little part of the world. I think these times have long time gone, and there is other countries where working time and working hours per week are still very, very different. But now speaking about this part of the world, I believe, again, here the flexibility would be if you are good and if you prefer to work, 4 days a week, right? And you have a work where you're not dependent on others and others are not dependent on you, and I think there's plenty of them, why wouldn't you do it in 4 days? Again, here I'm coming back to what I kind of said already. I always experienced that when I gave people the freedom and when people gave me the freedom, I delivered. I never, because if you feel or when you feel that you're trusted, you usually are not abusing the trust. Those that I was not happy with them even if I saw them every day, 40 hours a week in the office. It had nothing to do with that fact. It had something, it was something else. So I would be a strong believer in that, but I also wrote about that because at least a few years ago there was a debate in Germany. When you look at the statistics, and for example the OECD ranking, now I don't know the numbers for Switzerland by heart, sorry for that, but I can definitely tell you that the average of working hours of a German is not very high compared to the rest of the world. If I recall it, only Norwegians work less, and I think Belgians work less. I might be actually wrong on that. And so I think you always have to think about, like, is your productivity so much higher than the productivity of others? Because at some point it is also about the global competition. And everything that we have seen now, also with the issues in the global supply chain, now through COVID, now through the war, so the different wars that we're having, there's more than only the Ukraine. I believe that there's a lot of people that think we're bringing everything back into our own countries. I don't believe that you can decouple globalization. By the way, personally, in our lives, we live very, very global with many of the things that we're commuting. So I think it always has to be a balance. But I believe flexibility is the key.
Nice. Yeah.
And by the way, sorry, I'm coming to something else. Countries like Central Europe, Western Europe, and by the way, Eastern Europe, North America, the demographics don't work anymore. We have less and less children. The baby boomers are going to be in retirement very soon. We are having huge structural gaps of open jobs. We don't find employment anymore. So currently working on a different project on that. I think there is many things coming where maybe the question of working less will be a totally different one in 5 to 10 years.
Which goes hand in hand with an election that just happened a few days ago here in Switzerland about working age for women.
Yeah, but that is a totally different drama. No, because I think now I'm not Swiss, and I was only reading about it, but hopefully by the sources that I was read were good sources. It's so easy to say it's like they have to work a year longer, but all of the years until they become 65, there has been so many negative things that I actually think it's the most unfair vote. And now I'm sure that you know the numbers better, but if I remember well, it was the female voters were mostly against it, and the male voters were, if Switzerland would have an affordable childcare, yeah? But who can afford childcare more than 3 days in Switzerland with a normal job, right? We always exclude that. And so therefore, I think it's like, this is, I think, the biggest challenge when we speak about gender diversity is like giving the equal opportunities, but also providing the infrastructure equally. And women are in their entire in their entire professional life, they earn so much less than men because they are doing still a huge part of the care work, be it for the children or later on for their parents or for their parents-in-law or for other elderly family members. So we should not get into that detail because otherwise I'm getting annoyed. No, but you know what I think it's like, you need to see it in that change can only happen if you also have a societal change. And I'm not advocating for only, like now the women are working and the men are staying behind. I just think it's like there should be better approach for everyone, men, women, non-binary people, children, to live the life that they want to live.
So we're getting now to one of your passion topics, diversity, which is one topic that we definitely want to cover here. I want to give you a shout out. There will be room for your questions soon. So
if we'll get speaks that much anymore.
No. So diversity is extremely important. It's one of the dear topics also to your heart. I remember a few years ago that we wanted to have fundraising for WeShape Tech, and I had a lunch with somebody very senior from one of the big banks, and he told me, well, it's the women's fault that they don't advance in their careers because they just happen to have babies when it becomes very interesting. So we didn't get funding.
Yeah,
needless to say. Needless to say.
Yeah, it's also like the babies are so female always, right? It's always the women's, I think. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah. If we try to spin it in a positive way, Janina, what is needed for women? What is needed from the partner? What is needed from society? You touched upon a bunch of those pillars so that we get more diversity.
So let me first say that diversity for me is more than gender, okay? And let me also speak about that a little later, but because I think especially in the German-speaking countries, it is so much always like a man-women thing there, and it's much more than that. I wrote a chapter about that in my book. And when the book returned from the lecturer, right, and by the time that it returns from the lecturer, you really don't want to see that book anymore, right? You're really done with it. And so there was like that chapter where I wrote about some tax issues that especially happened in Germany. Those of you that know Ehegatten splitting, they might remember actually what that is. And then the lecturer, who was a middle-aged white man, said to me, but this is, made a comment, and that's the job of a lecturer, right? To say, is it logical or is it not logical? He said, but it doesn't really matter, it's not really true, because it's a choice of every couple to choose their taxation. And I was so angry, about that comment. I was sitting in my studio and I was yelling, right? I don't yell only when I'm alone, I hate yellers in the office space, but I was like, So then my partner came over and he said, what are you doing? What is so tragic? I said, can you believe it, right? And then he said, well, then obviously you haven't written it in a way that also middle-aged, traditionally living white man has understood it. And then I thought, yeah, here you have a point. And then I was writing, and here comes it. I said, it's like when you're madly in love, right, and you decide to have a family, independent from what gender or whatever. It's not that you're saying, okay, now one of you is pregnant and you're sitting down and you're making your life-term calculation. This is what I make. This is like a 3 or 4 or 6% pay rise per year. This is what we pay in private insurance. This is all of the engagements, or this is all of the promotions that I'm missing. You're not making a life calculation of where do you stand in 20 years from now, but that is actually what you should do. And that is so dramatic. And it's so difficult, and by the way, I also didn't really do that very well, right? When you are in love, and this is what you wanted, and even if you did not really plan the kids, right, it's still then, something that you're looking forward, and to have those harsh discussions, and to have the discussions, okay, if we have less income for a certain period, we're still paying. So for example, a friend of mine, he's an insurance broker, right? And then he says, it's very interesting to see, it's like there's a couple coming, and then she's pregnant, and then they have less income. She cuts down on her private insurances, like for the age and whatever, and he doesn't. That's a family income. It's a child, so at least as you're together, and then afterwards there's also different regulations. And like doing that discussion, I think, is the toughest. So I can only encourage you. And by the way, my grandmother, she always told me one thing. I didn't really realize it. I was too young to understand it, but she always said is like, try to do whatever you do, but always stay independent. And also financially independent. And I wish she would have still been alive when I was like 35, when I understood what she had been telling me, because I think she took choices because she had no independence, right? It's my grandfather who was earning the money, she was a housewife and staying home. They lived in a small village, very Catholic, so there were also social, not choices that most probably could be done. But I think this is really, we meet usually of being independent, and I think this is the best way to go into that. And now we come back, the infrastructures in every social system that I'm aware of are just like not that. And so I think we have to fight for it, and I think every one of you that actually has small kids, it's a very difficult time because you're always stressed, you're always not getting enough sleep. And I think when you share that between two people, it's always much better. Mm-hmm. So I'm passionate about it, but I'm also like saying is if it's a choice that people both take and they do it very consciously with all of the calculations, then it's fine. But unfortunately, I have too many people in my age, I'm 52, that are not divorcing now, because otherwise they would be equally or they would be financially worse off. And I don't think that this is the basis for a good relationship. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And all of the factors play into that, right? 20 years back, they were all equal. But now, it usually changes. But just like to tell you, there's also one model is also a different one. She's making the money, and he doesn't want to divorce her because he said it's like, otherwise, I mean, I don't know how I'm doing.
let's maybe capture 2 more questions here and then open up for a Q&A. So one more question with regards to diversity. One thing I heard is you opened, for instance, you mentioned diversity is not only gender diversity. Exactly. So I was wondering, what was one thing that you implemented and that worked that you would recommend other companies to do? And maybe is there something where you thought this is for sure going to work and you were surprised that it backlashed?
I mean, when it comes to every aspect of diversity, I have to tell you that was never a difficult thing in Siemens. I mean, I get a little bit of pushback, sure. So for example, when we first had the first truck at the Christopher Street Day in Berlin, which is like the largest in Europe, you know, you cannot imagine how many letters and emails I got that this is against God's will and all of that. But you have to be patient and you have to just, you know, I mean, rightfully reply and do all of that. And by the way, again here, there's always also countries where, for example, homosexuality is still forbidden. You know, if you would ever out yourself, you would be in death penalty. So I think that's also not something that a company can recommend. But a company can always say, our values is you are a human being, no matter who you are, no matter what you look like, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation. So that was the toughest thing, honestly, was to work on like getting enough people into the company with a disability. Of like creating a space where people that maybe couldn't hear that well, or they were blind, or they had other handicaps, you know, could be integrated into a normal day, and convincing the manager that there maybe would be people that maybe can only work 5 hours, but they can make the same contribution, but also convincing the people, and very often also their parents, that it would be a safe place for them to be also working with a lot of people with no disability. And I think that's still one of the biggest challenges for many organizations.
And any tips that you can share for others?
When it comes to diversity, I mean, I also often get the question of like, what did you not succeed? And I would say a lot of things that I did not succeed, but what I never managed to get the majority in the executive management, so in the Vorstand, to connect the diversity targets to the bonus of senior managers. I was pushing for it every year. At the beginning, you know, I had only 1 colleague supporting me, but at the end, there was like 3 against 5 votes. Okay, so we were 8 back then in the board. So I never succeeded in that. This is honestly very clearly, it's the same with ESG, environment, social, and governance. In the corporate world, in the business world, if you want things get done, put them close to the money. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I wish it would be different. And sometimes sometimes I actually think it's funny because, you know, you have so many different targets, and when you think about like what really is the amount in euro, or in dollar, or in Swiss francs that actually, you know, makes the trick. You could also like say someone at that certain level wouldn't care about like 5,000 more or less, but they do. So.
Thank you. One more question, then we're opening up, so get ready. You're very present on social media, and this is really refreshing to see somebody senior speaking up so authentically on that medium. How did you balance being on social media while managing a high workload? And second follow-up question, were there some colleagues, because you were considered as the rock star of Siemens, were there also some colleagues that didn't like that you had such a loud voice and they didn't?
Many. But, you know, that is, again, the point is like, I would also say is like, I was representing an organization that was also part of employer branding, that was also like sharing about what the company were standing for. And I think a lot of organizations, especially the large ones, they have not understood, but by having those super polished corporate things out there in the intranet and the brochures on the, you know, that is not the reality that people actually wanna feel, you know, how and what does it feel to be there. But it was a conscious choice, and there were many things that I was also not writing about it or not posting about it. And the social media for me is a little bit, you know, sometimes I'm feeling pressure from those people that are posting every day. I don't have stuff to say every day. And I also don't know, and I'm honestly, you know, I also don't want to make pictures of myself every day. My daughter always like says, Mom, when you do selfies, that really doesn't work, right? So you look horrible and I don't even know why you post it, and but whatever. So I think it needs to be a balance that is working personally for you. And by the way, I think social media is very positive in many things, but I think there also comes a point where, for example, I unfollow people because I cannot digest it anymore, right? So they write about like some real interesting topics, but then they put a picture from themselves. What I was like thinking, what does that picture have to do now with the topic that you're writing, right? I know, and it's all our fault that we click more on those what we see. Content doesn't really matter that much sometimes, but I think that doesn't mean that you cannot keep it in your balance. So when I have time, I post more. Tomorrow I have something to tell, hopefully. So maybe, I'm sure I'm doing a post, but then there's others that I don't. And by the way, I think it's, my job is to reach people with certain topics that I think are important or important to me. I'm happy if they like it, but I'm not an influencer, right? I'm not earning my money with social media, and I think that is very important as well to make that differentiation. So that fear of missing out, relax. Okay, so I think it's not that important.
Great, thank you. With that, we're opening up for audience questions. I hope you have okay. Usually, when you go up for audience questions, the first two, they know already what to ask. So, okay, we start here. Angela.
Okay, so Janina, if you could snap your fingers and have one single change happen instantly, what would it be?
Equal opportunities.
Care to elaborate?
And it takes so long if I elaborate. Equal opportunities, be it in gender, be it from social class that you are born in, because I think if you compare two random people, 66% of what they can make out of themselves is the question where they are born. And that has nothing to do with anything that you deliver. It's just like the country that you're born in, the family that you're born in, the parents that you have. And if we could get more to equal opportunities, I think that would be my dream.
All right, and there's microphones at every second seat. So if you take the microphone, push the button. So with the scarf.
Yeah. Hi, hello. I would like to ask you, when I work with women, many men tell me, oh, another workshop for women. I cannot see this workshop anymore. Yeah. I don't want anything else for women. And they claim, well, women don't really want to work. What would you say to a man like that? Because I really don't like these statements, and I want to hear some inspiration from you.
They're really saying women don't want to work? Most probably I would leave the room once in a while. I don't know what I would say. I think it depends on the people, because sometimes I think you cannot go into a discussion because it is about. I would like to understand what is their issue. And by the way, it's maybe weird for you if I say that I am super scared with some of the tendencies that are currently happening when it comes on, especially on gender diversity, the people that are speaking about it. There's a lot of people out there that say the right things because they can make money with it. They say the right things because they know it's kind of like socially asked for it, but they don't care about changing anything of the structures that need to be changed to actually get there. And this is actually provoking a backlash. Because, there is men on all of the different levels that say, hey, it's always about women and there's nothing in for me anymore. So I would, and I'm really, wondering also what would be the best way to do that. I think diversity is also about being inclusion and having also events where you invite everyone, And there can always be also moments when you only have women there, so for example, mentoring or something like that, you can actually do that, but make sure that you also have the same programs for the others. Now, Iris Bonet maybe would have been saying something differently, or I don't actually know, but I think raising awareness is one of the things, but you need to change the structures to actually make it happen. And sometimes I also said, but I think it's like I also said is, I said it was very a very senior round of very senior managers and politicians, and they were saying something similar. And I said, it's like, what are you afraid of? I said, it's like, are you so scared of us? And by the way, the moment that you know someone who has been working with me, I mean, they do not every time they see me think, oh, woman, 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 right? they see me as a person, and they see me as the Janina they like or they don't like, but I mean, you're losing the idea of like, he or she is a man or diverse or black or Asian or whatever, right? You lose that after a while. You only see those categories when you don't know people. And I said to them, what are you afraid of? And you know what? One of them said to me, is like that there is less power for me. And I said, well, and that's going to happen. But think about it. I mean, sometimes, I don't advocate for ignorance, but I'm advocating also to understand whenever I wanted to convince a person, in every negotiation that I did, and also very often did with the unions, the first thing that I tried to figure out is like, what is driving them? The first 80% of the time, I was not taking any stand of anything. I was only trying to realize, what does the other party want? What is their no-go? What is their yes-go? Because that is the power of negotiating. Understand where you can lead the others. If someone is afraid, take away the fear. And invite these guys and tell them, I can tell you that women can also work. This is amazing. Yeah. Women don't work.
Okay, let's maybe be a bit there in the back.
Hello. Okay. Thank you very much for for all what you say. I wanted to ask you how big of a barrier can be culture for diversity, and by this I mean I'm, for example, half Spanish, half Peruvian. And I oftentimes struggle to empathize with the concept of diversity that I see for some people, because I believe that depending on how privileged or fortunate you are, could be a bit of more narrow-minded in how you interpret diversity. So, for example, I've seen that the diversity concept in Peru is completely different than the one we have in Spain, and completely different than the one that Swiss people have. And then you can see as well, right, like more developed countries and less developed countries. And I sometimes feel like so that I don't agree with what they think here, I do. But I feel like when I compare with these other two backgrounds, I sometimes feel like, how big of a barrier is culture to kind of come to a conclusion of what should be diversity?
I think diversity diversity concepts, if you want to call them like that, they always have to be very local. And they also sometimes have to be very much adapted to an organization, right? It's a different thing when you speak about it on a country level than if you speak about it for a company level or for another organization. And I think it's rightly so, because the challenges of every society, of every company are different ones. That's why I was also emphasizing that diversity is more than what you see, right? I mean, I look at you guys, I don't know anything about you. I don't know the way that you're thinking. I don't know the way of the experience that you're having. And you could also make an interpretation that most probably is very false about it, right? So you look at people and you believe you see something that is then maybe not taking the place. But I think diversity means of also understanding that there is different perspectives coming together and allowing that it's not one perspective, the dominant perspective, that is requiring everyone else to adapt. And I think if you take it from that, the diversity is inclusion of different aspects, you can pretty much implement it anywhere. The people that are having the power in their hands are changing. You know what I mean? Yeah. So sometimes they look like this, and sometimes they are like this, and sometimes they are, by the way, I think it's most kindergartens are not really diverse, because most of the people teaching there are women. I don't think that this is the best and the most ideal thing for children to actually grow up with a very overly dominated female perspective. And most of the times back home, they also have the mothers that are spending more time with them, just speaking a little bit about that. But I think if you widen it up of understanding that it's not the determination of the power that actually is right, but everyone else, then I would hopefully think that it opens up the different perspectives. And if you say that that feeling that you didn't say that, but I think is when you have been growing up in different countries, and especially also in different cultural backgrounds, many of the people that I would say, and I can recall that very much, is like you never feel that you fit into the one thing, because there's always a part of you that doesn't fit here, and there's another part that doesn't fit there. But a lot of people would also say that for different reasons, but I think that's also normal.
All right, next question, here.
So thanks a lot for this wonderful insights. One question that I have, because you were saying, can you hear me properly? Okay. You were saying like when it comes to equal opportunity and also with respect to kids, it's a good idea to sit down, do the calculation. And with all the parameters in terms of future revenues. And I always wonder, why is one thinking in that direction versus just going 50-50, we split equal time. So for example, with my partner, we split up, like we decided, both of us will have half of the time we have the primary caretaker, and the other person can either be home or not home, be working or whatever. And basically, for us, this was so much easier because, especially in that circle where we all have some ETH connection, and most of us, before having kids, might have even had a pretty similar salary. And in Switzerland, where taxation is much higher once you are married, so you rather for taxes say like, hey, we just don't marry. So basically, and at the same time, childcare, yes, it's expensive, but at the same time, from what you earn from your net salary, if you divide it half-half, then it's so much better of a deal, because basically you have your kids there 9 hours versus in Germany, my friends, or in Austria back home, most of my friends say like, hey, at 2 o'clock, like if I don't pick up my kid before, then it's already the last person. And yeah, our kid has his best friends until 6 p.m. So it's a bit, I think it's very difficult, and I'm just wondering, like, why is it more on this financial aspect that we focus versus on the time aspect? Because that would be so much easier to not have all the hassle of the calculation.
First of all, congratulations if you manage to do it with your partner exactly like that. When we come to the stereotypes, I'm taking stereotypes here, okay? So forgive me for every other different setups, but stereotypes are easier to explain. He's a few years older. He makes a little bit more money. There is less money in the house, and there starts to be different discussions. Then comes another thing, what you said about the childcare situation. And by the way, then it also depends a little bit on how old you are. And that I also told you, and I said to Petra, we were not doing exactly well. We were both consultants. When the kids were coming, or actually, no, I wasn't anymore now that I remember, but he was still a consultant. The question is like someone traveling 4 or 5 days. How do you manage that? There were a lot of complications also coming into the picture. Could we have done better? Yes, we could most probably have been done better. But I'm also 52, and I'm assuming you're a little bit younger, which is very hopeful, that things are also changing, over the course of not so many years. Now, what I said about childcare, I don't know what you're doing, and you should also not answer me, and you definitely not answer me how much money you make. But the point is, like, if you are working in a restaurant or if you are a shop assistant, you cannot afford childcare in certain countries for 5 days full time. And so this is what I'm referring to again here. I think it's very tough also for me to get out of my bubble, of the bubble of like people that actually make enough money and they have to do this and they have a nice education and all of that. But that's what I also was referring to the equal opportunities. But yes, doing it in a joint way, I think is the best for the adult individuals as well as for the children. To get the balance of both of it. Because if you ask me what makes me happy, my family makes me tremendously happy. But if I only see them and I have no other input, they make me tremendously unhappy, right? So I think I need to have the balance. That's the choice. And if you manage that, then I think it's worth an applause.
And this was also just for like the circle that we are in here. Like, of course, I totally agree with you. Like, there are others.
But even if your assumption is right that we could have the choice in this room, I want us to think that others don't. And this, I think, is the very relevant factor. And in every society, the biggest risk for having poverty when you're older is being a single parent and is predominantly being a single mother. Because you cannot really get it all together. And I think that is something that from a structural changes, you need to think through, because that's more than only the individual part. Okay, Petra, give me a signal to shut up.
Yeah. Just there are a bunch of other questions I want to still get one or two in. So you, yeah.
I got two very short questions. One, you've been speaking a lot about your career path and how, also yours, by the way, Petra, and about how you managed to get from one stage to the other. What I'd be interested in is, how have you managed setbacks? What was one harsh setback that you had to deal with, and how did you go about this? And then the second question ties to building up a program. I myself built up a program. I'm a woman in tech, by the way. I have been at Meta. And I built up a program that is called Open Loop. And that program really ties together human-centric concerns with technology, governance, and product innovation. How you were indirectly given this answer to tie it back to finance if you want to make this project relevant. But interestingly, right now, and you all know in what conditions Meta is, it's exactly that program, that innovation program, that is basically being frozen, or similar ones. And I wonder, as an innovation manager in tech, how can I make that different in the future? And how do I have to tie it to maybe a board voice, etc.? So that's the more professionally content relevant question.
To your second question, I honestly can't answer that because I don't know your organization, and I don't know what would be the triggers to be played, if it would be possible or not. Unfortunately, most of the companies, whenever they come into a short-term thinking, they cancel everything that is visionary and that is long-term. And there's only a few that have realized that they are only competitive because they had not canceled on those things. So, sorry, I can't really answer that because I would have to understand more of the context. And the first, what was it? So many. So it depends. It's was I myself really not very happy with what I delivered and with the quality that I did, and did I think it was better? That was easier because I had not to defend myself. What I would say as an overall thing is it's more difficult to publicly fail. Yeah. So when people have been observing you, because sometimes people are taking questions or taking out of it. But I think it's also much easier to actually prevent to do that when you are getting the different perspectives and thinking all of the different things through. And the other thing is, it hurts, get over it. It's as hard as it is, you go home and then you maybe sit and cry on your sofa or tell the person that you're telling, and maybe it takes also 2 more days and you're afraid of doing that. But no one there's no single human being out there that did not fail. And then the next point is I think it's about doing it better, because what is a failure? That you could have been negotiating it better, that you could have been getting more money for it to get the profit a little bit higher. What exactly is a failure? That you hired the wrong person? So I think it's when you define it as that you learn from it and you're not repeating the same things anymore, then it's that part. But every success hurts. And I usually don't like the comparison, but I always do it with sports. No one wins the championship of whatever without having had injuries, without having had all of that. Petra, you said you had been following me for a longer time. Most of you, if you ever knew me anywhere before, you heard about me when I was already pretty much up in my career. The 20 years that I was working my butt off, that I was having a lot of issues, whatever I was, you didn't know anything about me. And that is what I think we always have to take into our things. We see people when they have reached a certain level. We don't see all of the effort that they have been putting, and we don't see how much it hurts. But again, the best that I ever became was through the moments when I failed. I never grew when I did something successfully. I grew by the things that I didn't make well. I grew by the wrong people decisions. I grew by screwing up in negotiations with the unions. I grew, screwing up, one day. And then, the next day you go back and you get back to the table, whatever, because the screwing up is usually not such a dimensional and so much at the finish line. But I think that is what very often people don't see, and it still exists. Yeah.
So we would like to hear more of you. One more question, and this time from the right-hand side. So, please.
You had a bias, by the way, in taking the people that could speak. It was only women.
Hello? Okay, we'll change that. Thanks for pointing that out.
I would like to know what advice you would give to your younger self, because you share so much of your experience. If you could just talk to yourself 20 years ago, for example. Any lessons learned?
No. And just because I think there wouldn't be an advice, because if I had been telling me what I would tell me at 25, I wouldn't have been believing it. I would have been feeling, oh, come on, old sock, right? I mean, let me do my own experience. And I think it was worthful that I did it. What I would do differently, right, is I would have been maybe more living. So I lived in China, I lived in the US, I lived in Europe, in different countries. But I, for example, have never really lived in Africa. I have never really lived in Latin America. I would have been picking most probably the choice of getting more global perspectives and getting more global perspectives also from countries that have a different social balance. But at 25, I would have been telling you, hey, come on. So I think it's good to have an orientation. But what I wanted at 25 was different than I wanted at 30, and it was different at 45. And most of the times that I did something, a lot of people around me never understood why I was taking the choices that I was doing. But I have a few people that know me very well, and those are the people that I was consulting with. One of them, my biggest criticizer in the world, my mother, right? And she, for example, it's we obviously don't agree all the time, but she was, for example, very often a good advisor for me. And I said, it's Mom, I'm actually doing that, and I know that everyone is going to think I'm crazy. And she said, yeah, but that's you, do it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Two men!
There was a third one, okay. Quick, yeah, please go.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I think it was fantastic. I'd like to ask a bit of a practical question, if I may. I'm a startup founder, can I say, and I'm trying to recruit, and I'm trying to have these principles of diversity and so on. One of the things you said struck me, which is you have to create this foundation or this infrastructure if you wanted to create this level of diversity and inclusion. I wanted to find out, are there any other principles or tips that you would have for someone who's trying to build a business and trying to practically make this thing work and trying to bring in inclusion on a day-to-day basis?
Inclusion for people with disabilities, or inclusion in general?
In general, whether it's gender or disabilities or whatever it is.
I think it's understanding that whatever you have on your mind is not what other people would have on their mind, looking at the same situation. And I think especially when you are a small team, so now you said it's you're a startup, so I'm assuming that you're not having hundreds of people yet, that you're a very, very small team, is that most probably the person that you click first, that you think, oh yeah, exactly like this, is not the person that I would hire. But someone said, and I'm stealing that with pride, is if you hire someone who will get on your nerves, you most probably make a reverse hire. So I think that is the part. So if you're, for example, in tech, I would always recommend you get someone into a team with human sciences perspectives. Now, I don't know what you're doing, right? But for example, with a lot of the algorithms, what we struggle with, we don't have the psychology in there, we don't have the human sciences factors in there. So think much broader about where do you want to go? What's your vision of what the company should actually do? And in order to grow there, what is the different perspective that you need? Does that? Good.
Thank you. Now, let's pick you. Yeah.
It's an advantage to be a man once again. Just kidding.
Thank you for the insights. And I was wondering about your opinion about, so we talked about bias, right? So right now we are at a certain age, or people are of a certain age, they work in companies, so they have this bias ingrained. So it takes more effort to change their mind or open their mind to new ways of thinking, right? What's your take on how we can change this bias, or actually not even have this bias at all for children? You know, so we have our children, we educate them in a certain way, which is under our control, but then of course they go to school, they go to kindergarten, which is outside of our control. So maybe looking at that level, what is your take on how things could be done differently so we don't even end up having this bias later on in our life?
Will not happen. We will always have a bias. And by the way, if we didn't have a bias, we wouldn't survive, right? Because so many, you know, our brain is getting 33 million parts of information every second, and we can only digest a handful. So there is a lot of decisions that we take, which is pretty much a shortcut. We take that because we are used to it. What I do is, a lot of people would always say, I don't have a bias. And by the way, I can tell you 15 years back, when I heard about diversity and the bias for the first time in the corporate context, I was like saying, haha, no, I don't, right? And then I was doing, and that is sometimes I'm forcing people to do the implicit association test, which is a test that takes 15 minutes on the Harvard, on the site or on the internet side of the Harvard Business School, I think, or Harvard Education, whatever, in every language, and you can choose a bias, gender or sexual orientation or ethnicity and whatever. And then you realize, oh my God, I have a bias, maybe a large one or not a large one. And that is the moment when you can start working with people, because if you know that you're biased, you can work on yourself of consciously overcome the bias. And you say something, and then you think, oh, wait a moment, that was a bias, let me do it again. And I think this is the only way that you can do it. And otherwise, unfortunately, I mean, I'm sure that there's psychologists in the room, but from what I know, that's impossible not to have a bias. But having said that, the more, what we're also doing is, you know, in a research currently, the more diverse an organization, a country, a city, a community is, the more inclusive they are. If it's only two groups of people, there's a lot of bias, a lot of rejections, a lot of racism, a lot of everything. But if you have like 10 people and they all have a very different background, they're usually the groups and the societies, and you can see that even in cities that are more open and less exclusive. And I think that is what we need to achieve. There's that 30% rule. If you haven't heard it, then just do some work and read about that. In the, you know, sometimes people are always asking, why is the quota always a 30%? 30% in diversity is because only if you have 30% different thinking people in the group is the one, not the one who's representing another opinion, but then the minority also becomes a voice, because otherwise one minority is always representing every minority. And as soon as you have 30%, it doesn't have to be like 70% men and 30% women. It can be anything, right? But 30% different, then the minority opinion gets heard as the majority opinion gets heard. Which I think is a concept that sociology has known for many years. But Rosabeth McCunter, I mean, if you want, she's a professor from Harvard, so if you want to read about it, she did the first research on that in the 70s already. Rosabeth McCunter is, I think, the right middle name. I can't remember.
Okay. I think you had one more question, or is it? Oh. Okay. Then.
Right to the center.
You raised your hand before, so I still had you in mind. Okay.
Anyway, okay. So I would pose a question to Janina as a person and the roles that you've taken up as a leader in your company, all the while exercising this capacity of what I feel is empathy. So I would, in my own perspective, I would just define empathy as giving the benefit of doubt to the other person, to let them speak about or hear their mind. It's fine, that's one route. But then leadership is also about calling the shots, taking accountability and moving forward. So where would you, as an empathizing leader, put where would you place yourself, or how would you call the shots? A small balance between you want to hear all the people out because you really feel for it, because you want to hear them out, and going ahead as a leader.
Most probably you could never hear everyone, right? Because most probably it's always too many. I think there is, so empathy does not mean sympathy, and empathy also doesn't mean that you cannot take clear cuts, right, on whatever, but I think you can explain why you're doing certain things. To try to be fast, what happens, and I'm sharing that story when I was like a very senior person already, there's people never tell you the truth. Unless you have known them for many years, but most of the time they are telling you what they believe that you want to hear, and you lose the grab of like what's really happening in the organization. And so, for example, in the HR team that I was leading, we established something, it was called, you know, the best conversations at every party are always in the kitchen, right? You remember that? So we established something like an HR cafe, and the concept was that we would meet every quarter for 90 minutes globally, everyone dialing in. That was before COVID, right? So everyone only there on the screen, and we had no agenda. But what was possible, that anyone totally independent, who he or she would be in the global HR organization, could share a topic that was important, or that she or he believed was important for the rest of the community to do it. So I was opening that up, and I was like speaking for 5 or 10 minutes, just whatever it was, and then it actually had the flow unless the community was setting the agenda. And that, for example, was a trigger where a lot of things popped up that I would never have been hearing before. And by the way, it also created a sense of belonging. So, I mean, one of the things that was really very dear to me is when I was like traveling to one of the teams in Asia, and then, I mean, at some point, there was like one employee coming to me, not a manager, right? An employee, he said, is like, it's so nice to also see you in person, but I know and I feel that I know you already. I even know the shoes that you're wearing because I'm seeing you so regularly when we're having our coffee chat. And that was exactly what I wanted to create, like the coffee chat situation. And I think you can create that even with a larger group. But I think you will never be able to hear everyone.
Thank you so much, Janina. This was, by the abundance of questions, you see already how much interest there is in hearing your stories and getting inspired by you. So a big round of applause for having you here. So for the ones who are interested, Janina's book, It's Now, is available for sale. There will be a stand outside where you can also get her autograph. So please take advantage of that. There's just a limited number of books, so please get there. And otherwise, we'll have an apéro outside that is waiting for us. So again, thank you. And
thank you for coming.
Thank you, Julia, for giving us the space to host the event over here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Die sind ja toll. Vielen, vielen, vielen Dank. Danke. Die sind ja echt total schön. Very nice. Die sind ja so schön. Thank you.